The U.S. is currently amassing its military might in the Middle East as President Trump threatens to bomb Iran in order to force it to surrender its nuclear program, bringing the two countries to the brink of war. Violence has been spreading in the Middle East, with Iran and Israel attacking each other openly in 2024 for the first time in their history. A war could lead to a global crisis, with 20 to 30% of the world's oil crossing through the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point that Iran has threatened to close if it's attacked. President Trump has been anything but vague, saying, quote, "If they don't make a deal, there will be bombing. It will be the bombing the likes of which they'd never seen before." The Iranians, on the other hand, are currently standing their ground, with their foreign minister saying, quote, "We will not enter any direct negotiations with the U.S. so long as they continue their maximum pressure policy and their threats," and the Iranian supreme leader having stated that the U.S. would receive a strong reciprocal blow if they were to do any mischief. While President Trump has made plenty of threats to other countries in the past, they have seldom been so direct. He's backed himself into a corner as de-escalating will now make him look weak and undermine his current strategy of threatening countries to get his way. With repercussions from Greenland to Panama to Ukraine, everyone will be watching what he does next. With so much pointing towards an upcoming clash between the US and Iran, the question that everyone should be asking is, just how do we get here? Welcome to Buried Origins. Today we're going to try shedding some light on that question by investigating the relationship between three key countries, the US, Iran, and Israel, and seeing how their strategies, and the decisions that they made based upon those strategies, have gotten us to this point. So let's jump into it. Now, it might seem obvious that the US and Israel don't get along with Iran, and so of course they don't want it to have nuclear weapons, and they've just been mortal enemies forever. But that actually ignores a longer history in which Iran was the US's main ally in the Middle East throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It was Iran, not Israel or Saudi Arabia, that the US used to project power into the region throughout most of the Cold War. Iran was central to the US strategy of containing the Soviet Union and the spread of communism through the creation of a series of regional alliances which sought to geographically surround the Soviets and hold their ideology at bay. To the west of the Soviet Union was, of course, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, but there was also the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization on the eastern flank and the Baghdad Pact, or Central Treaty Organization, on the southern flank. Iran was a key member of the Baghdad Pact, which also comprised the UK, Turkey, Iraq, and Pakistan, which together created a wall preventing the Soviet Union from reaching the Mediterranean or Arabian Seas and greatly limiting it on the geopolitical chessboard. The US was happy to flood Iran with weapons in its role as guardian against communism, and the King of Iran, or Shah, was more than happy to oblige with his oil profits. To protect the Shah from internal dissent, the CIA helped establish the Savak, a brutal secret police force which hunted down anyone opposed to the Shah's rule and was well known for its gruesome torture tactics. In addition to military assistance, the US was keen to see its ally Iran develop both economically and technologically as well, which led the US to incorporate Iran into its Atoms for Peace program, in which US nuclear technology was transferred to Iran to help it build nuclear reactors. And yes, you heard that correctly, the US actually established Iran's nuclear program, something that neither country likes to acknowledge. That close relationship between the two countries lasted until 1979, when a revolution in Iran overthrew the Shah and brought a government to power dominated by Islamic clergy. The person who led the clergy was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who was deeply critical of the US for its role as the primary supporter of the Shah and for its involvement in the region, something that bred deep discontent through many Middle Eastern countries. Khomeini knew he could use that frustration, as well as frustration that was spreading throughout the region with failed economic policies and a failure to defeat Israel on the battlefield, and so Iran adopted a very aggressive strategy of calling for regional revolution. This led Iran's neighbor Saddam Hussein of Iraq to invade it almost immediately in 1980, leading to a bloody 8-year war which neither side won. Now, in addition to calling for revolution, Iran started supporting different resistance groups throughout the region which were already fighting for their own causes. The most important one was Hezbollah in Lebanon, which Iran helped establish in 1982, during the Lebanese Civil War, to support its interests in the country and prevent Israel from imposing its own government there, bringing Iran and Israel into a proxy war. In addition to supporting Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran was actively supporting resistance groups in a whole host of countries, and took a leading role in funding Palestinian militant groups such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad, making its relationship with Israel even more hostile. While other important countries such as Saudi Arabia and Turkey have spoken out in support of the Palestinian cause, it is Iran which has been by far the largest material donor to Palestinian militant groups which have been fighting Israel. Now, this is a very important point, as Israel took over Iran's position as the US's closest and most reliable ally in the Middle East from 1979, and so Israeli-Iranian relations went on to closely reflect those of US-Iranian relations. Okay, so throughout the 80s and then into the 90s, Iran continued funding and arming its proxy militias throughout the region and had tense relations with the US and hostile ones with Israel, but avoided direct confrontation with both through the use of their proxies. These proxies were an imperfect weapon, however, as they couldn't be fully relied upon to carry out Iran's interests and were ultimately independent groups that made their own decisions. They also wouldn't deter an invasion like they didn't deter Iraq from invading Iran in 1980. So the Iranian government started looking for new ways to protect itself and found the answer in its pre-existing nuclear program and a new ballistic missile program. The nuclear program had been abandoned during the all-out war with Iraq due to it only being civilian in nature, but once the war ended in 1988, Iran decided to start pursuing nuclear weapons and the ballistic missile technology to carry those weapons. Those two technologies would eventually become two of the key pillars of Iranian strategic deterrence to prevent aggression against it, with the other pillar being its proxy forces. Now, when Iran restarted its nuclear program, it made sure to keep it secret, and it was largely able to do so throughout the 90s and up until 2002, when an Iranian dissident group revealed two previously unknown nuclear sites in Iran. This was incredibly controversial and led to international outcry and eventually international sanctions. The US and Israel were of course strongly opposed to Iran gaining nuclear weapons, and so when the US invaded Iraq the next year to remove Saddam Hussein from power, there was serious consideration about bombing the newly revealed Iranian nuclear sites. Iran was also included in the list of countries that made up President Bush's infamous Axis of Evil speech in 2002, which made many wonder if the country was next in line for regime change after the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. However, there were several things that kept the US administration from bombing the Iranian nuclear sites or invading Iran. One was that Iran took the threat seriously and reached out to the US through back channels to discuss its nuclear program. To many in the US administration, this was a sign of weakness, and they felt the Iranian government was on the verge of collapse and that an invasion wouldn't be necessary. At the same time, Iran voluntarily allowed the International Atomic Energy Agency to inspect its nuclear sites, caving to international pressure and hoping to avoid a US invasion. These developments, combined with the fact that US occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan were already going poorly, kept the Bush administration from bombing Iranian nuclear sites, something that easily could have led to an all-out war with a country whose population was greater than both Afghanistan and Iraq's combined. On top of this, the allegations of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq that the US had used as justification for its invasion proved to be false, and there was little appetite for another war on that exact same premise. If that wasn't enough, a war with Iran was also likely to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the globe's oil supply flowed in 2003, causing massive disruption and leading to spikes in US gas prices right before an election year. There was yet another factor that kept the US from bombing Iranian nuclear sites, which is still relevant today, and that's the feasibility of successfully destroying these sites. Now, when the Iranians built these sites, they weren't stupid. They built them deep and into the side of mountains to protect them against aerial attack, which is how they knew that the US or Israel would attack them if they would choose so. So it was not known if a non-nuclear US or Israeli attack on these sites would actually seriously damage them, and so given the massive repercussions of attacking the sites, the US and Israel ultimately decided not to do anything. This point remains highly relevant today and is one of the main reasons why these sites haven't been attacked thus far. Although both Israel and the US continue to improve their weapons, the Iranians continue to dig deeper, and it's still unknown if anything but a nuclear bomb can effectively destroy these sites. While Iran went through a period of openness regarding its nuclear program after 2003, eventually as the years went on, that cooperation broke down as they became more and more confident that they weren't about to be attacked. This is when Israel started pushing the US more and more in order to launch an attack on these sites. Okay, so let's pause here and discuss something that's quite important. Israel has always had one of the most capable and disciplined militaries in the region, including a very modern and sophisticated air force. However, for most of its history, its ability to strike Iran directly by itself has been severely limited. There are a few reasons for this, but the main one is that Iran and Israel are actually quite far away from each other, with most of the sensitive sites in Iran being over 1,000 miles away from Israel. This means that the Israeli Air Force, which has always lacked large strategic bombers, would need to refuel its smaller fighter jets en route to their targets above either hostile or unfriendly airspace in Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, or Jordan, potentially bringing Israel into conflict with those countries while exposing its jets and pilots to incredible risk. All of this for an attack which might be limited in its ability to destroy Iran's nuclear program, as Israel's lack of large strategic bombers also limits the size of bombs it can drop, thus limiting the amount of damage that they can do to these buried sites. These factors have deterred Israel from attacking Iran directly and have led to years and years of pleas with the US to join them on a bombing campaign, to provide diplomatic cover, logistical support, and, key, the heavy bombers to drop more destructive bombs and increase the mission's overall chances of success. But by 2007, US intelligence believed Iran was not actually pursuing a bomb, just strengthening its ability to do so if it decided to. Then 2009 brought two new leaders to Israel and the US who had very different opinions on how to handle Iran. Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, who seriously wanted to bomb Iran, and Barack Obama in the US, who favored a non-military approach, such as when the two countries managed to smuggle a computer virus into one of Iran's major nuclear sites and cause enough damage to push the program back months or years. Obama's non-military approach bore fruit a few years later when in 2012 the US and Iran began back-channel talks with Iran that eventually led to the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, agreed between Iran, the US, UK, France, Russia, China, and Germany, in which Iran significantly reduced its ability to produce bomb-grade uranium and plutonium and allowed inspectors to verify this in exchange for sanctions relief. The deal began in 2016, and Iran took a series of verified steps to limit its nuclear program, such as pouring concrete into its main plutonium reactor. Unfortunately for the Iranians, they failed to predict how turbulent US politics could be, and that same year brought Donald Trump to the presidency, who in 2018 withdrew the US from the deal and reinstated the sanctions the US had in place. However, since the deal was between Iran and 6 other countries, the US's departure was major but did not fully remove Iran's incentive to stick to the deal, and so it decided to strike a middle path and gradually over the years roll back its commitments to the deal without abandoning it entirely. Then Trump's policy of maximum pressure towards Iran brought the countries close to war when the US assassinated one of Iran's top generals in 2020, but both sides ultimately de-escalated the situation. The Iranian government never genuinely wanted to war with the US, so its response to the assassination was extremely tame, even warning the US hours in advance of its retaliatory missile strike on a US base to ensure that it didn't kill any US troops, while also being able to save face. Somehow, the two countries avoided going to war until the Biden administration came to power the next year. Biden attempted to return both the US and Iran to the nuclear deal, but Iran had a tough time committing to a new deal with a country that so easily tore up its commitments, and so it eventually, over the course of the Biden administration, continued rolling back its commitments to the Iran nuclear deal to the point where essentially they had no restrictions on the nuclear program whatsoever. By 2022, its breakout time, or the amount of time it would take to produce enough weapons-grade fissile material to make a nuclear bomb if it decided to go for it, was as low as 7 days, markedly different from the 12 months it was kept at under full implementation of the nuclear deal. Another point to clarify here, the reason that this short breakout period isn't as big a deal as it should be is that US intelligence currently believes Iran lacks the capability to miniaturize a nuclear weapon so that it can be fit on top of a missile. Without a quick and effective delivery mechanism such as a missile, an Iranian nuclear bomb actually isn't that threatening, as it would never be able to get a bomber or a ship anywhere near a critical US or Israeli target. Because of this, and because Biden was severely distracted by Afghanistan, COVID, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Biden administration ultimately decided not to really do anything about Iran, and Iran continued to strengthen its ability to go for a bomb. But as all US administrations find out sooner or later, you can't ignore the Middle East for long. And on October 7, 2023, Hamas, a Palestinian militant group based in Gaza, shocked the world by launching a massive attack on Israel and caught the country completely off guard, killing 1,200 people and taking 250 hostages. Now, the massacre and the history behind it deserve an entirely separate discussion, but the repercussions are central to explaining how the current regional balance of power has shifted and why Iran has lost 2 of its 3 major deterrents. Okay, so a very brief summary of what happened after the October 7th, 2023 attacks. Israel, of course, attacked Hamas in Gaza and continues to fight there up until today. From Lebanon, Hezbollah, which Israel has fought intermittently throughout the years from its founding, began a daily rocket barrage of northern Israel, and the Houthis in Yemen began launching occasional long-range drones and missiles at Israel. Now, each of these groups ultimately makes their own decisions, and their motivations deserve entirely separate discussions, but for our purposes, just picture Israel coming under attack from all sides by a series of militias that have all received funding and weapons from Iran. The critical flaw of the Iranian strategy of arming and supporting these groups is that it can be dragged into their conflicts when it doesn't want to be, which is exactly what happened with the October 7th attacks, something that caught Iran and Hezbollah completely off guard at a time that neither was really looking for a full-scale engagement with Israel. Anytime that these two violently clashed with Israel in the last few years, it was always symbolic posturing to save face, which is exactly what happened after October 7th. In order to be seen as supporting the Palestinian cause and protecting the Palestinian people, Hezbollah began launching daily missile barrages into northern Israel. Now, these attacks represented a small fraction of Hezbollah's total arsenal, and the group avoided a ground engagement with Israel. In this way, it tried to straddle the fence by being seen as supporting the Palestinian cause, but still avoiding an all-out war with Israel. For its part, Iran enhanced its support for Hezbollah and tried to weaken Israel where it could without attacking it directly as it had done previously. Now, what Iran and Hezbollah failed to understand was that the October 7th attacks completely changed Israeli national security strategy. It had been the bloodiest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and the Israeli government had completely failed its primary reason for existing, which is to protect the Jewish people. Israel was now on a warpath for vengeance and was determined to reestablish its image as one of the world's premier military powers who was not to be attacked. Threats were no longer to be tolerated in the way that they once were, and the Israeli government suddenly cared a lot less about international opinion. The underlying assumption that Israel could exist surrounded by hostile powers as long as its superior armed forces had deterred them from attacking it was completely shattered. And so Israel went after perceived threats viciously. It unleashed an atrocious war in Gaza, one that went terribly from a political perspective, but quite well from a military perspective, as it destroyed Hamas's ability to threaten it without incurring the military losses that everyone thought it would. Then in April 2024, Israel bombed the Iranian embassy compound in Syria, an incredibly aggressive action as embassies are protected under international law. Sidebar here, of course, Israel's embassy in Argentina in 1992 was actually bombed, with evidence pointing towards Hezbollah and Iran. In this case, the attack was overt, although the building was being used by Iranian generals coordinating anti-Israeli forces in the region, which Iran had been doing in Syria for years, with Israel continually attacking Iranian forces there in a shadow war. But the bombing of the embassy brought that shadow war out into the open and dared Iran to respond, or else be seen as not willing to defend itself. And respond it did. Iran decided to retaliate against the air bases that were used for launching the airstrikes on the embassy, and it did so by launching a massive drone and missile barrage 2 weeks after the embassy attack. The attack was huge in what it symbolized. It was the first time that one of these two countries attacked the other's territory from its own territory, and thus there was an escalation on top of an escalation. A huge normative barrier had been crossed. In reality, the attack was a massive failure, and Israeli, US, French, Jordanian, and UK forces intercepted almost everything the Iranians launched. The failure of the attack greatly undermined Iran's ballistic missile deterrent, as now Israel knew it could effectively defend against it. With this new knowledge, Israel of course wanted to retaliate strongly against Iran by attacking it directly. But Biden was keen to keep the situation from getting out of hand, and used his leverage to pressure Israel into a limited response. That plea was successful, and Israel launched an airstrike that destroyed the radar of a key air defense system which was protecting one of Iran's main nuclear sites, demonstrating to Iran that it had the ability to hit their most well-protected sites if it really wanted to. After this, it seemed that both sides could claim victory as they had gotten their shots in, despite a massive sea change that came with a direct exchange of fire. So Israel continued to fight Hamas in Gaza, and Hezbollah continued to bomb Israel. Then suddenly, in September 2024, Israel launched the infamous pager attacks on Hezbollah, when they dealt a massive strike to the group by blowing up the pagers and walkie-talkies they had been using for communications, which Israel's spy agency had planted explosives in through a fake supply chain in a very clever intelligence operation. Now, why these attacks happened when they did is a bit open for debate. Tensions had been high, of course, due to the daily skirmishes between the two, but there's also a theory that Israel was concerned Hezbollah would discover the explosives, so it was a use it or lose it scenario, and they went for it. Regardless, after the attacks, Hezbollah was so vulnerable that Israel decided to launch a bombing campaign against it, and absolutely devastated its missile arsenal and its command and control by assassinating nearly every single one of Hezbollah's high-ranking commanders and a huge portion of its middle-ranking commanders as well. The speed at which Israel completely eviscerated one of the largest non-state militaries in the world shocked everyone, including the Israeli military, who thought it'd be a tougher fight. Suddenly, Iran was watching its strongest proxy get absolutely obliterated by Israel, and still it did nothing until Israel invaded southern Lebanon in order to fight Hezbollah on the ground on October 1st, 2024. Now, this forced Iran's hand, and they came to Hezbollah's assistance by launching yet another missile barrage, really their only option to deal Israel any damage given the distance between the two. This attack was significantly different from the barrage back in April 2024 because dozens of missiles flew over major civilian centers like Jerusalem on their way to military air bases and intelligence targets, so the psychological impact on the population was huge, although the practical impact was once again minimal, as the attacks didn't end up destroying much. Israel actually had so much warning time that it got all of its valuable aircraft, which were Iran's main targets, off the ground and circling around the Mediterranean. Now, after such a public attack, and after their military was doing so well against Hamas and Hezbollah, Israel was ready to launch severe retaliation against Iran. However, Biden was able to talk them down from their stronger response options, such as targeting Iran's nuclear sites, its oil infrastructure, or its leadership. So Israel chose a moderated military response, launching attacks with its air force, which destroyed Iran's best air defense systems and then damaged Iran's ballistic missile manufacturing infrastructure. Targeting Iran's air defense systems not only made attacking its ballistic missile manufacturing easier, it also reduced Iran's ability to defend its skies against aerial attack until it could replace those systems, something that it still has not been able to do so, as most of its air defense systems came from Russia, which is now using all of its air defense systems in its war with Ukraine. And here we find one of the key changes in regional calculations. Iran never had an outstanding air defense network, but it wasn't supposed to be so bad that it could be taken out in one night, which is exactly what the Israelis did, seemingly without any difficulty. This just added to the long list of military engagements that the Israeli military was having, which were all turning out to be much easier than they had expected them to be. From a purely military perspective, ignoring humanitarian considerations for a second, the Israeli Defense Forces have been on a roll, smashing Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran's air defense with such lethal efficiency that it's completely upended Israeli strategic thinking and the regional balance of power. The Israeli military currently seems indomitable, crushing anything it goes after. The only thing that could potentially restrain it is the US administration. And herein we have another massive change with the re-election of Donald Trump, someone who is far more amenable to Israel than Biden. But Trump is in a tricky spot. He makes a big point about getting the US out of its forever wars, not into them. So despite his friendliness towards Israel, he might be reluctant to join in a bombing campaign against Iran. Although given his recent threats, it seems like he's very much coming around to the idea. In the past few weeks, the US military has taken all of the steps we would expect it to right before bombing Iran, and specifically targeting the Iranian nuclear program. As I mentioned earlier, one of the key reasons Israel has waited for the US to join it before attacking Iran's nuclear program is the US military's ability to drop very big bombs. For the exact mission of attacking Iran's nuclear programs, there is one specific bomb and one specific plane to carry it. The plane is the US's B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, and the bomb is the 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrator, the world's most effective non-nuclear bunker buster as far as we know, which is able to penetrate through 200 feet of earth and reinforced concrete. The B-2 stealth bombers are the most expensive planes in the world at $2 billion apiece, costing $135,000 an hour to fly, which is why the US only has 19 of them. Their incredible cost comes from their stealth capabilities, which make them harder to detect by radar and gives them the ability to penetrate heavily defended airspace and drop very heavy bombs. Now, because they're so valuable, the B-2 bombers are usually kept in their base in Missouri, and even when they would be used to bomb Afghanistan, they would leave and return from that base, going on 44-hour flights. However, there are a few other bases in the world that can host the B-2 bombers, one of which being Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. This base has long been understood as the place the US would stage B-2s from if it decided to use them against Iran, as this is too far from Iran to attack from its own territory, but the bombers can rearm there much faster than flying back to the US. And in the past 2 weeks, the US has moved 6 of its 19 B-2 bombers to Diego Garcia, where they have been used to bomb the Houthis in Yemen, another group that Iran has supported in the past. Now that's complete overkill. The Houthis have very limited air defense, and the targets being attacked are not thought to be deeply buried enough to warrant the risk of such precious assets. So then that begs the question of why they're being used. And the answer to that question seems to be for posturing and for target practice for the crews. Right now, Trump is blatantly threatening Iran with a bombing campaign if they don't cave to his demands on their nuclear program, and bombing one of their proxy militias with the exact planes everyone knows he would use against Iran's nuclear sites is a very clear message to Iran that he is serious about his willingness to use violence. Okay, so we've just reviewed how events since October 7th, 2023 have greatly undermined 2 of Iran's 3 deterrents to countries attacking it, its ballistic missile program and its proxies. Now all that Iran has left is the threat to go for a bomb, which puts it in a tricky spot. It could make a mad dash to develop a bomb and the means to deliver it, but if the US and Israel detect that it's going for that bomb, they almost certainly will attack it. In pursuing nukes to defend against an attack, Iran might actually cause that attack in the first place. And with dramatically weakened proxies and ineffective ballistic missiles, it has no way of seriously retaliating against Israel and the US if they were to attack it. The strongest thing it could do would be to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, where 20 to 30% of the world's oil production transits, similar to what the Houthis have tried to be doing in the Red Sea. In fact, the US bombing campaign against the Houthis might also be a proof of concept for doing the same in the Strait of Hormuz, and a second US carrier group is currently on its way to the Middle East. If Trump and his military believe they could keep the strait open, that changes their entire calculation. Iran could also attack the oil infrastructure of major US allies in the region, like Saudi Arabia, whose oil infrastructure it attacked back in 2019, wiping out half of the kingdom's oil production. Now, those US allies would have very little to do with the bombing campaign by the US and Israel, but Iran would be looking for any way possible it can deter such an attack, so it has already threatened to do exactly this. On top of these considerations, the underlying doubt about being able to destroy the program with bombing has not changed for the last 2 decades. Even with new weapons such as the massive ordnance penetrator, experts and even former Israeli prime ministers still doubt that the program can be damaged in any significant way. The expertise and knowledge are simply too widely spread, and the sites are simply too deeply buried. However, there are 2 other ways that Israel and the US could potentially attack these sites, but they're so crazy that they're not often talked about. One is a nuclear attack on the facilities, which is definitely the best way to destroy them, but of course the political fallout of using such weapons unprovoked would be so severe that no one is seriously discussing it. The other is a commando raid on the ground to gain access to these facilities and destroy them from the inside, which is absolutely ludicrous and something the US would almost certainly avoid with its aversion to ground fighting in Middle Eastern countries. While Israel did conduct a high-risk raid on an underground Iranian missile manufacturing site in Syria in September 2024, A similar style raid in Iran is a completely different beast due to the tremendous distances involved and the need for constant air support and heavy ground fighting. Israel would almost certainly need significant US support to pull it off, and even then the risk of such an operation is likely to be considered intolerable, at least for the US. All that being said, Israel is a country that continually surprises the world with its inventive ways of attacking its opponents, so it certainly has some capabilities that as a public we simply don't know about. One of the last things I should mention briefly is the domestic political calculations for both Israel and the US. Right now, Israel's leader, Netanyahu, is facing a lot of resistance and is using the ongoing wars and turbulence to justify many of his decisions. A war with Iran would be a convenient way of distracting the public and excusing controversial decisions. For Trump, the impetus goes both ways. He's already caused a lot of economic mayhem with his trade wars, and so he might not want to risk making it any worse by attacking Iran and risking the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, but he might also be looking for a simple distraction and find attacking Iran to be that distraction. Also, Trump has adopted a policy of constant threat-making since returning to power, with some prominent examples being Greenland, Panama, Ukraine, and Canada. All these threats only work if countries genuinely believe that Trump is willing to use violence to back up his threats, but a lot of what Trump has campaigned on is avoidance of wars, and so there will come a time that a country seeks to test his resolve. He knows this, and using violence to back up one of his threats would be a clear demonstration to the entire world that he is serious, and so from this perspective he'd be looking for an easy win. Militarily speaking, Panama and Greenland are the easiest to go after, but politically speaking, Iran might be the best target as the argument he can make to the American people is far more convincing, preventing a hostile Islamic regime from acquiring nuclear weapons and defending Israel. So, wrapping up then, back in the middle of March, Trump gave Iran a 2-month deadline to reach a new nuclear deal, and the two countries began direct negotiations on April 12th. It's anyone's guess how those negotiations will go because a lot will depend on individual personalities, but the US will believe that it can push Iran far and that it has it backed into a corner. On the other hand, Iran will be loathsome to give up its last line of defense. It could cave to threats and allow inspectors into its sites without fully giving up its program, something that Trump might agree to. But according to US intelligence, the Israelis seem to have made up their minds and will attack Iran with or without US support. The only reason they haven't done so already is that they're hoping to convince Trump to join them, and so they're waiting on the results of the negotiations. If those start to drag out throughout the summer, Israel might very well fear that they're losing their chance to attack and take it. What is clear is that we're going to see very soon whether it's diplomacy or violence which ultimately wins the day. It'd be very embarrassing for Trump if the deadline passes and nothing happens to Iran, with political ramifications from Moscow to Beijing. So we are likely to see some major developments one way or another quite soon. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the brief backstory of how we've gotten to this point. Please share and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos covering the origins of modern-day political events, and leave a comment if there's a specific event you want to see covered. See ya!